Hello, my good friends, and welcome back to the Cozy Representative, exploring music and culture. One interesting thing about both music and culture, which I have seen happen, and many others have too, is a phenomenon that has become known as the 10-year rule. This phenomenon doesn't always happen 100% of the time, but more often than not, the 10-year rule typically occurs within the general pop culture zeitgeist when it comes to, sorry, I'm going to quote a Say Anything song real quick. When it comes to incoming and outgoing trends and styles of music and art, here's what happens. Step one, the thing gets really popular. Some sort of cosmic boom in the universe happens, and some new trend or style or wave of culture explodes. In music, it's usually a specific genre or subculture which has its own unique sound and aesthetic. Some examples are grunge or hair metal or nu metal. Some unexplainable cosmic thing happens and the wave explodes to a mainstream level. It becomes a big craze, and it usually spends the next 3 to 5 years in the limelight, basking in its relevancy and exciting newness. Usually, there's a younger crowd who attaches themselves to it first, while the old heads, the critics, and the veteran tastemakers of the time don't get it, don't take it seriously, and usually see it as some stupid fad which is going to die out soon and won't be remembered. Directly after those 3 to 5 years of exciting mainstream relevancy of the wave, the old head critics briefly win the battle as that new wave of culture which exploded into the zeitgeist fades away and it dies out. And there's maybe 5 to 10 years where, in again, the grand scheme of things, that wave or subculture could not possibly seem less cool or, could not possibly seem more irrelevant. Think of how hair metal looked in the 90s. It just becomes stupid. It doesn't make sense anymore, I guess, is a better way to put it. All the bands and artists who were doing that style when it was relevant are suddenly trying to act like they were never that thing at all. They try to reinvent themselves and kind of shun the old thing. And fans kind of do the same thing too. We all try to act like we were never into that thing that was, became out of style a few years ago. And then, for some reason, after enough time, usually after about 10 years, another kind of unexplainable cosmic phenomenon happens in public consciousness where that outdated, irrelevant trend or style has a second coming. It becomes cool again, but now it's cool in a retro way. It gets reevaluated and rediscovered by a new generation. The young kids who first listened to it the first time around when the old heads thought it was corny have grown up now, and now they're the old heads who write for Rolling Stone or whatever, and now that wave, which was originally looked at as a dumb fad, is finally taken seriously and given the respect it might deserve from music culture at large. And this very thing has happened recently in the last few years, and it's happened with the music that I grew up with, 2000s emo and pop punk. In the 2000s, it exploded with bands like Fall Out Boy and My Chemical Romance and Paramore being a few big defining bands in its heyday. The kids loved it, the old head rock critics hated it. It was big, but you got bullied if you showed up to gym class wearing a My Chemical Romance t-shirt. I know it, I lived it, I think we all kind of did. In the 2010s, the mainstream era of it ended. It became irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Let's be honest, we were all of us who grew up with it, we were all kind of, around 2014, 2015 or so, we were all trying to act like we grew up listening to like Pitchfork bands or something, but we all know that that's not true. But the 10-year rule, my friends, around 2017 or 2018, we saw the cultural emo and pop punk revival start to begin on kind of a smaller scale. It was kind of bubbling under with, events like Emo Night starting to pop up, as well as the wave of SoundCloud rappers at the time, people like Young Lean or Lil Peep or Juice WRLD, who were surprisingly starting to embrace some of the sounds and aesthetics of 2000s emo and pop punk in their own new, updated way. I'd say from 2020 to present, we've seen this all come to a head. The emo pop punk nostalgia and revival wave is now undeniable. Big artists like Machine Gun Kelly or Olivia Rodrigo are doing their own updated versions of guitar-based 2000s, snotty emo and pop punk, but again, adding their own updated spin on it, which both of those artists and several others have exploded in the mainstream cultural zeitgeist of today.
You got any new music that you're working on right now?
Yeah, bringing pop punk back to mainstream.
And all of the like B tier, C tier, and D tier emo and pop punk bands from back in the day are all having their little moment in the sun again, embracing the nostalgia which the culture now has for their bands by, playing all these nostalgia-focused festivals like When We Were Young, or, DJing emo nights and all that. And that's no disrespect to those bands or anything. I'll probably be personally, DJing, emo YouTubers of yesteryear parties in like 10 years or something. So, the irony is not lost on me. Regardless, all of this has been causing something funny to happen. So personally, all the bands who I would consider like the A tier bands from, the 2000s emo pop explosion are bands like specifically Paramore and Panic at the Disco and Fall Out Boy, and My Chemical Romance, but they broke up. They weren't around in the 2010s. But the other three, Paramore, Panic, and Fall Out Boy, were all able to successfully reinvent themselves in the 2010s, and they were all able to stay mainstream level relevant after the original emo and pop punk wave died out. All three of those bands successfully did that, regardless of what you might think personally of the newer music by any of those bands, because that's all subjective. I think that's quite a remarkable feat and shows how great of artists all those bands really are. It's not easy to, stay relevant and stay successful. It's incredibly hard in the music game. And look at it this way, right? Once a band or artist gets really big, the goal of that artist typically isn't to just be a martyr for the genre of music that was popular when they were 18. They want to be their own continuously relevant, timeless rock star. I don't think anyone really wants to be a nostalgia act or wants to create the same art over and over and over again. And I think with any great artist, there's a tasteful balance of embracing the roots while always evolving and moving forward to new, exciting, uncharted territory. So, why am I bringing all this up? What does this have to do with the new Fall Out Boy album? Well, now that we're in an era of 2000s emo and pop punk nostalgia and semi-revival, whenever these big bands like Paramore or Fall Out Boy or Panic, who have reinvented themselves outside of the emo paradigm, put out new albums now, within this nostalgia wave, everyone, every time, everyone is all like, oh, I wonder if they're gonna go back to the old thing. I wonder if they're gonna make a nostalgia album. And none of these bigger legacy bands have, which I think is really cool. I think it shows a lot of integrity to stay on the forward-thinking path they've been on, keep it unique and futuristic, as opposed to musically looking backwards to please, like people in their 30s who go on Reddit. Paramore put out a new record last year where they continued to evolve and embrace their newer style of swanky West Coast indie pop. Brendan Urie put out an album of like 70s rock music and then announced he would no longer be doing Panic at the Disco. That's really funny to me now, looking back at that. Regardless of what you or I might think of Brendan Urie at the Disco, the solo project era of the band, or the musical quality of Viva Las Vengeance. Because thinking about that album now, I don't really think it's like all that bad. It's got some tracks on it. As a whole, I think it's, kind of a little bit forgettable, kind of throwaway music. It didn't really sound like Brendan Urie had anything left to say really on it, but I do think that releasing an album that sounds like Queen meets Thin Lizzy, and then immediately retiring at the height of 2000s emo nostalgia, following up your previous album, which was your big return to mainstream success, no less, is actually a really funny move on Brendan Urie's part, in my humblest of opinions. I don't know if he planned that intentionally, but I don't know. I almost respect that. I think it's funny, if nothing else. So, what does this mean for Fall Out Boy? Well, Fall Out Boy, up until the beginning of this year, 2023, have been pretty quiet in the midst of the semi-revival nostalgia era of a genre and an era which they had a large part of popularizing and defining. And of course, I saw many people on the internet, many of you in my comment sections, saying, oh my god,
are they gonna go back to pop punk?
I saw people saying shit like, well, Pete Wentz is a businessman. You know, of course he's gonna cash in on the latest trend, because everyone loves old Fall Out Boy, and everyone hates new Fall Out Boy, and they're total sellouts, and they were better when they were pop punk, blah, blah, blah. Shut the fuck up for 1 second. Cozy's here, and we're going to unpack that together. Before we get into what Fall Out Boy actually delivered musically on this new album, for those people who only like Fall Out Boy's first couple albums, and people who think that they were only good as an emo pop-punk band and should go back to that sound, and that Pete Wentz is just a soulless, money-hungry corporate businessman who has been forcing his band to be trend-hopping sellouts ever since 2007, I want to take a second and look, as far as what you think of the music, again, that's all totally subjective. We all have our own tastes, and that's okay. But I want to take a second to suggest that at this point in Fall Out Boy's career, maybe it's time for all of us to actually reevaluate and kind of redefine who Fall Out Boy really are and what kind of band Fall Out Boy actually is and embodies and represents and has been doing this whole time. So Much For Stardust, the new Fall Out Boy album, spoiler alert, is the first time in Fall Out Boy's career where they made a truly full circle, all-encompassing Fall Out Boy record. We're going to unpack that more in a little bit, but I think it's kind of impossible, actually, to talk about So Much For Stardust without looking back on the career of Fall Out Boy from the beginning until now, and actually contextualize everything a little bit, and maybe re-examine some aspects of Fall Out Boy and aspects of Pete Wentz's creative direction, which still to this day I feel are often misunderstood. So let's take a moment to just see how we got here real quick. So at this point, most people know the origins of Fall Out Boy, right? They were not pioneers or inventors of emo or pop punk, but they played a big part in helping popularize and also define emo and pop punk in its 2000s mainstream heyday. It's funny though, because they really weren't pop punk guys going into the band initially. Fall Out Boy were like real hardcore kids in the 90s. They played in real hardcore bands. They were listening to shit like Earth Crisis. They were listening to, I don't know, like Botch and Dead Guy. 90s metal, metallic hardcore. Like what metalcore used to be in the 90s. Coalesce, Zayo, that kind of stuff. I actually did a whole video on Fall Out Boy's hardcore roots about a year ago on this channel, actually. You should go check it out. It's one of my favorite videos I've done on this channel, actually. But yeah, Pete Wentz and Andy Hurley played in a whole bunch of 90s political, vegan, straight edge, metal hardcore bands like Race Trader and Arma Angelus, Extinction, Birthright, Kill the Slave Master. Andy Hurley actually still plays in Race Trader to this day. And then you even had Patrick Stump, who became the singer of Fall Out Boy, with those sweet, sweet melodies. Even he wasn't a pop punk guy going into it. Apparently in high school, he was really into like Marvin Gaye and Elvis Costello and Michael Jackson. There's some interview out there, I remember him saying that he wasn't super enthused on like being in Fall Out Boy initially, because he said something along the lines of he didn't really want to be the singer of some pop punk band. But yeah, really, really think about that. They weren't pop punk guys. They were hardcore dudes, part of an intense political subdivision of hardcore, mind you, which to me actually seems very anti-pop punk. So it's kind of funny. They started their side project pop punk band Fall Out Boy in 2001 as like literally kind of a joke, like just as a fun side project thing to goof around with like silly, catchy pop punk music, you know? And I don't think they thought much about it at first, but it just so happens that they ended up being really fucking good at it. They captured real emo and pop punk lightning in a bottle on those first two albums, Take This to Your Grave and From Under the Cork Tree, and they totally blew up and got, you know, mainstream level huge in 2005 off of the strength of From Under the Cork Tree's lead single, Sugar We're Going Down. And I think pretty much everybody can agree that, well, not everybody, but I think most of us, all of us can agree, if you're watching this video, that all of Fall Out Boy's pre-hiatus music, from Take This to Your Grave to Fully Adieu, oh yeah, and like Evening Out with Your Girlfriend is in there somewhere, was extremely special music. They were a special band. There was a certain special pixie dust magic about them in that era. Fall Out Boy went on hiatus for a few years, from around 2009 to 2013 or so, citing general exhaustion from their busy schedule and a need for Fall Out Boy to decompress for a bit. And when they returned from their hiatus, they didn't return as the scrappy, punk rock alternative emo band that they seemingly were previously. They were now a sleek, clean-cut, accessible, mainstream pop rock band who kind of had more in common musically with, like, Maroon 5 at that point than they did with, like, New Found Glory or Saves the Day, you know? A lot of old fans hated it and still hate it, you know, and think that they're sellouts or whatever. You don't, you know, go on the internet. You'll find them. Fall Out Boy sucks now. They sound like Imagine Dragons. I just want to say, for people who say that, have you ever actually, like, sat down and listened to Imagine Dragons? It doesn't sound like Imagine. There's okay, we're going to get to that in a second. I think with the passage of time, looking back now, it makes a lot more sense why 2010's post-hiatus Fall Out Boy sounds the way it does, and why they kind of updated themselves with the times, and why they tackled 2010's accessible pop rock music the way that they did. And I'm really against the idea that their 2010s albums were just like soulless sellout albums or whatever. And let me tell you why.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to The Sauce. If you are flipping through People magazine's most beautiful people issue, you may have seen this guy next to me explaining on how to put on guy liner. Pete's friends from Fall Out Boy.
Recognize it?
Exactly. It's right here.
By 2007 and 2008, as early as 2007's Infinity on High, as far as Pete Wentz was concerned, Fall Out Boy were already a full-on part of the mainstream pop music world. In Pete Wentz's head, by that point, he wasn't comparing Fall Out Boy to Warped Tour scene bands anymore. He wasn't thinking about Fall Out Boy from an indie perspective anymore. He was thinking of Fall Out Boy as a full-on mainstream act existing in the pop world. In his head, Fall Out Boy wasn't competing with like 4 Year Strong. They were competing with literally like Lady Gaga. And I think that alone is where a lot of confusion from fans comes in regarding their more recent stuff, and why Fall Out Boy's initial 2010s post-hiatus music was so jarring for a lot of people, myself included at the time. You know, most fans still thought of Fall Out Boy as this alternative scene band who were going to continue making alternative scene music. But as far as Pete Wentz was concerned, Fall Out Boy no longer existed in that world. And I don't believe that Pete, on a personal level, was really interested in that world anymore either. The scene, Warped Tour pop punk world, you know? I think Pete Wentz is actually, and I say Pete Wentz because, you know, Fall Out Boy is more than just him, obviously, but anyone in Fall Out Boy will tell you that he is the main creative director of Fall Out Boy. He's the driving force of kind of what they do. And I think Pete has actually been very genuine in his moves throughout the years, even though some of them may not have seemed like they made sense at the time. At the end of the day, I think Pete Wentz is just really interested, on a personal level, interested in mainstream culture and pop culture trends, past and present and future. He is interested and just likes bands who get really big and bands who are futuristic and transcend the initial thing that they were known for, and bands who become timeless and always relevant. And I think that's been his goal for Fall Out Boy for a long time. One of my favorite things about Fall Out Boy that they've always done, really, that I appreciate more now than ever, is that they've always incorporated artists and producers from completely other worlds of music than Fall Out Boy were initially known for. You know what I mean? As far back as Infinity on High, they were in the studio with people like Babyface. They had Jay-Z introduce their album. That was crazy. On Folie à Deux, Lil Wayne is on that shit. They do a song with Pharrell Williams. He just really loves creating Fall Out Boy's unique off-kilter version of whatever is currently happening culturally at the time, whenever they make a record. When it comes to those records, like Save Rock and Roll, American Beauty, American Psycho, and Mania, Fall Out Boy were doing their take on what was popular at the time, you know? And, what was popular in the 2010s? Yeah, there was a lot of Imagine Dragons. There was a lot of Mumford and Sons. There was a lot of 21 Pilots. There was a lot of EDM. There just was. Definitely a weird decade for rock music, but definitely an experimental decade for pop music, and I would say a revolutionary decade for hip-hop, the 2010s decade, that is. And for better or for worse, a lot of that stuff slipped its way into Fall Out Boy's music. But either way, Fall Out Boy chose a career path of always staying futuristic and updating with the times, but listening back to records like Save Rock and Roll or American Beauty now, or even Mania now, I do believe that at the core of it, they really did keep it Fall Out Boy. At the heart of it, at the center of it. Those records essentially becoming Fall Out Boy's commentary on modern times, which to me, get ready for this, I'm about to drop a bombshell on you, which to me is really what Fall Out Boy have always done since the start, if you think about it. Even when they were making pop punk records like Take This to Your Grave or Cork Tree, even back then, they weren't pop punk guys, but they were offering Fall Out Boy's unique, slightly off-kilter take on the pop punk genre, which was super popular at the time. Yeah, motherfucker, yeah! You see what I'm getting at here? Does this make sense? At the end of the day, now, I'm a big supporter and fan and defender of post-hiatus Fall Out Boy, their 2010s material. I think there's good stuff from Save Rock and Roll all the way to Mania. I find myself enjoying all of those albums, and I say fuck the haters, personally. But the one thing that I can pin down, which at the time, especially when those records were coming out, the one thing that I always thought was lacking in the 2010s Fall Out Boy records, the one downside, I always kind of felt they were missing, I could only put it as the spirit of old Fall Out Boy. I really appreciate their experimentation, and I really like those records now more than ever, especially as I get older. They hit me harder. But at times, I think these records, sometimes they could come off as a little too polished, to the point where they could sometimes sound a little stale or a little flat. The records rarely sound or feel like the four guys in Fall Out Boy playing together in the same room. Again, which isn't really, it's just a different way of recording music. There's pros and cons to both. But seeing that the band Fall Out Boy playing together in a room and kind of making records the traditional self-contained rock band kind of way was a big part in what gave Fall Out Boy their special edge initially. The 2010s albums can kind of lack that magical, electrifying, pixie dust, unique spirit of old Fall Out Boy that I was talking about earlier, which I think was the most special thing about them initially. So if anything, that's what I wanted out of this new Fall Out Boy record. I wanted the spirit of old Fall Out Boy back, not the literal sound of old Fall Out Boy back. I don't want them to make a pop punk album again. Basically, I just want that exciting, unique, band again. You know what I mean? I don't want another album that's kind of just shooting for giant arena pop rock singles. I want a record that's just it's like a front to back record. It's a cool album all the way through. It's not singles based. It sounds like the band Fall Out Boy. It feels like the band Fall Out Boy. I want to rock out with my cock out. I want to feel all the feels and dance and cry. We've experimented with Fall Out Boy being a clean-cut contemporary pop band for a bit now, and that was fun. I'm glad that they did that, but, now maybe it's time to bring it all back home a little bit. Again, not a recreation of the past, and not giving in to making a quick buck off of nostalgia because the old thing is cool again or whatever. I don't really see much integrity in that, personally. And all that being said, let's talk about their new record, 2023's So Much For Stardust. So, there was a bit of confusion between the release of Mania in 2018 and the recent release of the new record here in 2023. That's a long time, 5 years. It was actually a longer time period than the hiatus between albums. There was a Fall Out Boy new album day counter Twitter account that I followed, counting the days between Mania and the new album, and it was actually longer than the hiatus, literally. And at times, it really kind of felt like the hiatus again, at least for me. There was a period around 2020, 2021, even into 2022, I guess, where the only thing going on in the Fall Out Boy world was the Hella Mega Tour with Weezer and Green Day, which obviously is a very big, high-profile tour, and, they weren't just doing nothing, but there was no talk of a new album, no updates about the state of the band. Every member was kind of off doing their own different projects. Pete has a record label and, according to his Instagram, plays golf every day or something. Patrick composes music for a children's Spider-Man TV show. Joe wrote a book and made a podcast and made a record with his other band, The Damned Things, with Andy Hurley, who's also in that band, and Andy Hurley also plays in 40 different hardcore bands. I honestly thought Fall Out Boy might break up at that point. That was a thought I literally had. It was maybe they're all just interested in different stuff. So once news of the new album started coming out, I was relieved and very, very stoked and intrigued on where the band would be headed musically. I wasn't expecting a full return to pop punk album or whatever, but I also honestly wasn't expecting what we did get here on So Much For Stardust in a good way. The first real news that I heard about the new record was that for this one they returned to their original record label, the record label who put out Take This To Your Grave back in 2003, Fueled by Ramen. I also heard that they'd be doing the whole record with producer Neil Avron, who did Cork Tree and Infinity and Folie à Deux. And this news alone, these two little nuggets, made me pee my pants. I was they're going back to Fueled by Ramen and recording with Neil Avron again? Holy shit, I don't even care what the record sounds like. That's good enough for me. It might be worth pointing out that this is the first truly band record, self-contained band record that Fall Out Boy has made since Save Rock and Roll, actually. The other two records after that, American Beauty and Mania, Fall Out Boy utilized the big pop artist method of making records where, there's a whole bunch of different producers and different songwriters working on it, which again, that's not a bad thing. It's just a different way of making records, but it's not the way that had always, it was different for Fall Out Boy. So, there's pros and cons, I think. On So Much For Stardust, the whole thing is produced by Neil Avron. There's only one co-write on the album, two if you count the Ethan Hawke sample on The Pink Seashell. Other than that, this record was entirely written by Fall Out Boy and produced by one guy. So, on January 18th of 2023, 3 days after my 26th birthday, The debut lead single from So Much for Stardust came out, the song Love from the Other Side, and I heard it that day and I actually shit my pants. It was the first time in a while where a new Fall Out Boy song on the first listen made me, like, I'm not kidding, I literally shit my pants. Like, I had to throw my pants away. I had shit in my pants. My first thoughts when listening to Love from the Other Side was that it was way darker than I was expecting it to be. Wow, there's big rock, like beefy rock guitars and straightforward Andy Hurley drums on a Fall Out Boy track again. Holy shit, the chorus just sounds like a classic Fall Out Boy chorus, and even more than sounds like a classic Fall Out Boy, it really feels like a classic Fall Out Boy chorus. You know, it's not about the sound that I wanted them to return to, but it's like the feeling, you know, and the chorus of Love from the Other Side feels like the chorus of Arms Race or the chorus of Alpha Dog, you know, songs that came from an era which now is definitely, it's been enough time that era is definitely now looked back on as classic Fall Out Boy, you know? One thought I initially had about Love from the Other Side was that I do actually think it sounds like a logical next step or a good proper evolution from Mania. You know, it's not a knee-jerk away from what they were doing on Mania. And if you don't believe that, I would recommend going to check out Mania again, with the new album in mind. Maybe that will add some better contextualization to Mania, but really wasn't a knee jerk away for me. It was a feels to me like a good evolution from that album. But really having that classic Fall Out Boy spirit back. One of my first thoughts was, man, this should have been their first single coming back from hiatus back in 2013. You know, this song is what, like, my songs Know What You Did in the Dark should have been or something. You know, this sounds like it could have been the follow-up to Folie à Deux. Pretty crazy. The next single, released around only a week or two after Love from the Other Side, is Heartbreak Feels So Good. And this song is really cool because not only is it another great song, but it's the song that told people, hey, this actually isn't going to be this throwback record. You know, this is the poppy Fall Out Boy sound that they evolved into or whatever, you know. But, that being said, my first thought hearing Heartbreak Feels So Good, I was like, oh, this is like what Mania should have sounded like. This sounds like a more well-executed, less jarring version of the vibe that they were going for on Mania. And I still believe that about that song. So already before the album came out, these two singles and the duality of them were showing potentially that this record was going to connect the old and the new Fall Out Boy under one umbrella, and like I said, bring it all back home full circle. And that's exactly what this record does. Here on 2023's So Much for Stardust, for the first time, like I said, Fall Out Boy made not a nostalgia record, but a full circle record, a record which musically brings their whole career to a full circle moment. It calls back to pretty much every different previous era of Fall Out Boy on certain tracks and in certain sections, bringing it all together in what I would consider a cohesive package. I've heard some people say that it doesn't feel like a cohesive record because all the songs are a bit very different from one another, but I personally do think it's cohesive and all feels like the same record. Here's the thing about it. It's not cohesive in the sense that it's like every song is similar, but it's cohesive in that they all truly feel like Fall Out Boy to me, and they all truly feel like different sides of Fall Out Boy's personality to me, both Fall Out Boy as a band and the individual members of Fall Out Boy's different interests and styles, you know? Each song on this album kind of feels like they all feel like movie trailers or something. Each song feels like a trailer for a different movie, but all composed by the same people who have the same goal. It's a very theatric record. It has a lot of personality. I have a short attention span, and the first time I listened to this album, it really kept me hooked all the way through because of how different a lot of the songs are, and I was always wondering, oh, what's this next one gonna be? You know what I mean? And still now, as I continue to listen to it, I think they pulled off a record with a lot of variety, with a lot of cohesive style and grace, which again, I think some of the 2010s Fall Out Boy albums, kind of felt like a less well executed version of that. You know what I mean? Like, they really hit the big finish on this one in those regards. And like I was saying, for the first time in a while, the new territory that Fall Out Boy explores on this album is, for the first time maybe ever, like more informed by classic eras of Fall Out Boy or all the different previous eras of Fall Out Boy, not just whatever happens to be going on currently in Fall Out Boy's take on it. I feel like the only eras of Fall Out Boy which aren't called back to on this album are, the more straight up pop punk style, like on Take This to Your Grave, or I guess the EDM flirtations around the Mania era with songs like Young and Menace or Super Fade. But, and I really want to speak on how, like, I feel like the most hated Fall Out Boy album by a large margin at this point is Mania. I feel like I just see on the internet and hear in conversation with friends that, like, that album is like, people just, think it's bad. I like Mania a lot. And I think it's interesting, this narrative that, like, Mania was this one thing and then So Much for Stardust is this, like, back to the other thing. But I actually think this album has a lot of, like, similarities to Mania, or, like, is almost, like, more similar to Mania than people regard it as. Like, for example, the song Heaven, Iowa, that song sounds like it could be on Mania. And if you go back to Mania, I think either Heaven's Gate or Church could be on So Much for Stardust, or Bishop's Knife Trick. It's really, it's not a return to pop punk. It's a continuation of Mania, but just a little bit more all-encompassing of more of everything that Fall Out Boy has to offer, in my opinion. And I would actually recommend, if you're someone who just isn't into Mania, I would re-listen to that album now hearing this one, and it might sound differently. I think So Much for Stardust does something cool where some of the 2010s Fall Out Boy albums might have felt a little out of place or confusing. I think this album, the strength of So Much for Stardust and the way that it does bring all the different styles of Fall Out Boy together, kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, recontextualizes the 2010s albums and kind of bookends it all, and makes those 2010s albums, Mania included, definitely Mania, it feels like those albums, the styles they were going for, feel like they make more sense now hearing So Much for Stardust, and it I don't know, you know what I mean? It, like, recontextualizes those ones. Does that make sense? At the end of the day, I've been really, really, like, kind of blown away by So Much for Stardust. I really do love it. And I think that this album is, like, so Fall Out Boy. Like, this album really sums up, like I was saying, all the different dudes in Fall Out Boy's personalities, and also just the personality of Fall Out Boy as a whole. Not as where they started, not as where they were on Centuries, but all of it. Like, this record really is Fall Out Boy to me. This is like the ultimate record, the ultimate, they really nailed the big finish on nailing their personality as a band. And I think, I'm just going to say, this might be a bold statement, but I think if you're someone who really likes old Fall Out Boy and you weren't into the pre-hiatus or the post-hiatus stuff rather, and you're not into So Much for Stardust, I mean, I don't think there's any hope for you at this point anymore as I think if you don't like this album, like, you might just not really like Fall Out Boy very much. And I don't mean that in a like you're a fake fan or whatever, because again, music is all subjective, and there are plenty of bands out there where, like, I like a couple albums by, but I don't like the whole discography by. But for me, as a big Fall Out Boy head, I think that, like, at this point, if this album doesn't do it for you, like, Fall Out Boy is not, it might not be the band for you. I almost feel weird saying that, but that is a thought I've had about this one. Like, if this one doesn't do it for you, I don't think Fall Out Boy's ever gonna do it for you at this point. And that's fine. You know what I mean? If you're a pop punk head and Fall Out Boy to you is a pop punk band who made good pop punk music, then that's awesome. But really what I wanted to drive home in this video is that there's way more nuance to Fall Out Boy than people realize, and I think a lot of aspects of them are very misunderstood and overlooked, you know. And that's not me saying that they're a better band than you might think they are, or whatever, but I just think that, like, you kind of got to dive in, you got to peel back the onion of Fall Out Boy a bit for it to really make sense. And Fall Out Boy are not an obvious band in that regard. You know what I mean? It kind of takes some like evaluating, and it takes some time. But once you discover, you know, kind of the overarching message of what of this album and what I feel like Fall Out Boy's entire career represents, you know, you get something really special and really, like, you know, big brain and futuristic to me. Because at the end of the day, you know, this record, and looking back on their 2010s albums, and even the boundaries that they pushed in the 2000s when people still considered them just a pop punk band, Fall Out Boy to me represents the importance of growing as a person, not just as a band, well, as a band, but what I get from their evolution and from Pete and his creative direction is it shouldn't be a scary thing or a negative thing to get outside of your comfort zone and grow as a person and keep moving forward in your own life. You know, it's not, you're not really going to get, and the context of this album in this emo nostalgia wave that we are in, you know, I think this album, to me, then this is just my takeaway from it. It represents that idea that, like, you know what, it's important to embrace your roots and remember where you came from and appreciate that and respect it. But, you know, if you live your entire life trying to be in high school again, you know, you're not going to find happiness. You're not going to get anywhere with that. You know, change is something that should be embraced, not only in music, but just in our personal lives. It's something that's unavoidable, and it's something that is a scary thing for a lot of us. But it's like, to me, So Much for Stardust is like, yeah, we gotta respect and recognize where we came from, and we can think about that sometimes. But, you know, we can't just be nostalgic all the time. We got to remember all the progress we made along the way, all the steps we made along the way, all the hardships, all the things we learned as people, you know, and focus in on how important that is and how much growth. Like, I'm talking about not just like bands and music, but I'm talking about like me as a human being and you watching this, like, you know, this nostalgia period is fun because it's like, yeah, emo is great. We all grew up with that, but, you know, we can't just forget all the progress we've made along the way and how important it is to progress as people and as a society and in culture and in music. And even when people around you are saying, no, you shouldn't change, you should not do that weird, crazy thing you want to do, you should stay the person that I like and that I know. No one should have to let that or let the comfort of the past stifle them from evolution. And that to me is like kind of that's my takeaway from So Much for Stardust. You know, everyone wants them to go back, or not everyone, but a lot of people do. And it's a reminder that, hey, like, not only is this record like all encompassing of all the steps they took along the way, but it's still, Fall Out Boy doing a futuristic, there's still room to grow from, and it's still new territory on this record. And that to me is like, I don't know if that was intentionally their response to emo and pop punk nostalgia. But to me, that's like the what this record means in the context of that. And I think that that has so much integrity and is so important. And that's So Much for Stardust for me. And that's Fall Out Boy for me. And they're my favorite band. And yeah, I really could go on and on. Just in case you want to know, let me tell you a little bit about this, what I think of the songs on this record. So on my first listen to it, the three that I were the most drawn to, Heaven, Iowa fucking blew me away the first time I heard it. I was like, holy shit. And this song has turned into a song that honestly, like, I can't listen to it very often. Sometimes I skip it when I'm listening to the album, not because I changed my tune and think that it's lackluster now, but it's actually like such an emotional song for me that I can only listen to it in like special moments, so there hasn't been a Fall Out Boy song like that in forever, so that's awesome. Great song. I Am My Own Muse is a big standout for me. I love theatrical music. I really do. That's just, I don't know. I love strings and I love big, larger than life theatrics in music. And this song is like, it's really pulling from Patrick Stump's movie composing, which I think is in a really tasteful way. Again, I feel like they were trying to do that a little bit on Mania, but it felt a little rushed and not executed as well as it could have been. And I Am My Own Muse is a very well executed version of Fall Out Boy being theatric and utilizing what Patrick has learned from composing films. Honestly, the another favorite of mine, I know it's like a single, but Hold Me Like a Grudge might be my favorite song on this album, to be honest. This one just really, it's just a great Fall Out Boy tune, it's just a great pop rock song. I really like the chorus really blew me away when I first heard it. Something about it, I don't know, it's like dancey, but there's just something about this song. I really like the guitar riff in it, the prominent I don't know, not to sound like a boomer, but it is cool to hear like a fucking prominent guitar riff in a Fall Out Boy song. And something about Hold Me Like a Grudge, it's like this is like it's everything that I could want from a Fall Out Boy song. It's like, if I could sum up what I like about Fall Out Boy, it's displayed here in Hold Me Like a Grudge. Love From the Other Side, so fucking good. Another favorite of mine. I mean, come on, it's just undeniable. Who doesn't like Love From the Other Side? Come on, it's so fucking good. I feel like I see a lot of people give a lot of love to Fake Out, and I think Fake Out is a great song. But it's not like a standout for me like it is for other people. I really appreciate it. I think it's got a great chorus. It's a great, almost like 90s alt rock kind of vibe or something. But it's not a standout for me in the same way that it looks like it is for other people. I don't know what that means, but that just, I don't know, is what it is. So Good Right Now. This is kind of a polarizing song on this album. I have seen some people rank this one pretty low, and I get it, because it's a little like cheese, it's a little, I've heard people say it's like kind of Disney Channel. I don't know, man. I actually really like So Good Right Now. I think it's like again, I could see how it is kind of Disney Channel and cheesy, but it's like again, like I was saying earlier, Fall Out Boy's kind of bizarre, off-kilter, slightly twisted take on a happy, fun song, which I'm really glad there's a song like this on the album, because Fall Out Boy doesn't have, it's kind of more jovial than Fall Out Boy has ever really gotten before, and I think they just nailed it on this song. I can hear what they were going for, and it's not like certain Fall Out Boy songs, for example, the song American Beauty, American Psycho by Fall Out Boy. To me, that song is I can tell what they were going for, but I don't feel like they nailed the big finish on that one. In So Good Right Now, I feel like they nailed it, And those are kind of similar vibes for Fall Out Boy. I don't know. Again, I could talk about Fall Out Boy forever. Baby Annihilation is sick. It's cool to hear, Pete Wentz doing a spoken word part, and not even just for the sake of like nostalgia or whatever, but I really like that there's like a short spoken word song on this album. It really adds to the whole thing that this album isn't just like shooting for big singles. It's like a full album experience with interludes. The Pink Seashell interlude, it makes it a theatric experience listening to it all the way through, which I was just, that's like what I was fucking hoping this album would be, and it is, and that makes me so overjoyed. Flu Game and 10 Years, these songs feel kind of similar to one another in the sense that there's a lot of heart and soul in them. They're very like literally emo and like emotional, you know what I mean? And really kind of hit you in the feels in a way that the slick pop rock Fall Out Boy of the 2010s didn't often do as much. But these are very like, songs that feel very personal and just kind of hit you. What a Time to Be Alive is a lot of fun. The closer, So Much for Stardust, is a tear jerker. I don't know. I love this record. I love this record. This record is like exactly the album that I wanted Fall Out Boy to make, and I really wasn't sure what they were going to do, but I'm really happy that, it feels like a really, really good time to be a Fall Out Boy fan. And if you've made it all the way through in this video, thank you. I really just felt like I wanted to share, this video, everything I talked about is basically like informed by nights that I've had, like smoking way too much weed with friends of mine, talking about Fall Out Boy and contextualizing Fall Out Boy, or just going on walks by myself and thinking about Fall Out Boy, and the context of it all, and I thank you for listening to my own personal sort of contextualization of the band and what this new record means. I really appreciate it. Let's see. Before I go, I know that on this channel this year, I've been a little bit slow between videos. I've been a little busy in my personal life, but I'm trying to get back on the ball in terms of uploading more regularly. But for now, if you're interested in supporting this channel and you want to actually get like weekly videos, head over to my Patreon. It really does help out the channel a lot, and I am doing weekly videos on there. In the $10 tier, you get I upload a video every week, and then in the $5 tier, there's a video every other week. And I'm doing a series called Cozy's Basement on there, where I'm, I don't know, it's a fun little thing for me to do in right now with it. It's kind of like the videos on this channel, but a little chilled and laid back. And for each episode, I've been picking either a CD or a record from my personal collection of CDs and records, and kind of just giving a little, story about the album or interesting things about it, and also kind of going personal with it, and like, where did I buy this album? What does this album mean to me? Etc. So if you want a little bit more of this, I don't know why you would, but if you do, and you want to support the channel along the way, head over to my Patreon. There is a link in the description to that. And thank you to all these people on the screen who support me over there. I don't really know what else to say. I have more videos coming, and I love all you guys, and you guys are really like the sweetest people ever. And anyone who watches these videos, it means a shit ton to me. So thank you. And what a time to be alive. Have a great night, guys. It's been the Cozy Representative. I'll catch you next time. Love you.